All right, everyone. It's time for my review of Nahiri the Unforgiving. And so, yeah, thank you again to Oktagon for letting me review this Planeswalker, giving it to me as a gift, as well as a card that I will also spotlight in this review, but will probably give it its own video soon as well. So let's get started here. You want to go ahead and look at her abilities, and also I'll let you guys just go ahead and look at her um, abilities at each level. If you want to take a look at them closely, I'll give you a chance to do that now. You can go ahead and pause and read from the screen here if you want. All right. Now that said, let's get into it. All right. So these are the other red and white planeswalkers that I own. There are a couple other ones, but I just never bothered to pick them up. Ajani, Vengeant, and Nahiri 1, Nahiri the Harbinger, were a couple of the first planeswalkers I ever picked up beyond the original 5. And then Kalemne I came to a lot later. That was I took a break from this game for a couple of years. Then when I came back, she had already existed. So it took me a while to actually have the resources to pick her up when she came in the vault. And I'm glad I did. And so I'll be spotlighting Nahiri the Unforgiving against all these walkers. So let's go ahead and do that. Start with hit points. Nahiri the Unforgiving, pretty much smack dab in the middle of everyone else. 112 is perfectly serviceable, got no problem there. But of course, Kalemne with 128 takes the cake. She is a giant, so that makes sense. Mana gains. Some people have a preference as to what they like in terms of mana gain. I personally like a lot of mana in their respective colors, and if they get a lot to green, that's also great as well, because it's a lot easier to convert to green than any other color in the game, with maybe the exception of white with Healer of the Pride and blue with Cut Your Losses. But Cut Your Losses will eventually rotate out of standard. But I mean, we'll always get some broken blue things that will make it easy to convert or whatever. So anyway, with that said, Nahiri has some weird mana gains here. She gets +6 to red and +2 to white and 0 to everything else. So no negatives, but it's weird that they give her so much mana on one of her on colors and just a very meager bump to her other color, because it's a lot harder right now to convert to red, I feel like, than to white. But you can kind of treat her like a mono red walker, like you can build toward a red. But the problem is, if you're playing with lands, a lot of them are only convert to 2 colors. There's not that convert a lot to 1 color. So if we still had, stuff like land forming and those awesome rare lands from Zendikar, then this would be even better. But for now, you get some of the benefits of mono red, but with more drawbacks than a mono red walker would get when it comes to converting, because converting gems to your planeswalker's color means it's also going to convert to a weaker color rather than just all to one color. You always want more to one color when it comes to a land or a conversion. It just makes things a lot easier for you to create optimal gem matches. So that's how I feel about her mana gains. Everybody else, Nahiri the Harbinger has some pretty decent mana gains. I feel like her mana gains still kind of hold up even in this day and age. I feel like they're still making dual color walkers with this type of mana spread. Ajani Vengeant is very flat. It's kind of the opposite there. And so +2 to green, +2 to red, +1 to blue, and +3 to white. It's one of the main reasons I don't use a Johnny Vengeant very much at all anymore. He's just kind of outdated. This way of like really flat mana curves on a walker that is dual color is just not the way that they make planeswalkers anymore, and for good reason. He's just too slow to get your stuff out. So I would normally recommend people stay away from planeswalkers that have really flat mana curves. And then Kalemne, Disciple of Iroas. This is the type of mana spread that I love. +5 on her on color matches, and then just one negative, and not a crazy bad negative. -2 to black. You'll still get a little bit of mana, though not much, but sometimes you just end up with just not enough red and white gems on the board. But for the most part, if you build for her, you can get crazy amounts of mana. So I love that. It's just that red and white are a little bit difficult right now to convert to compared to other colors. So she's still great for that reason. And then deck load, we got Nahiri the Unforgiving. I personally like to play with a lot of supports, so the more support slots you get in a planeswalker, the better for me. But anything over 6 is great for any spell or support planeswalker. 6 creatures is fine. You're never, well, you may, for reasons that we'll get into, you may want to use a lot of creatures in a deck with her, but not necessarily. You got 6 spells and 7 supports. So I personally like that deck load. Nahiri the Harbinger has by far the worst. The slots you need in your deck are, you're gonna always want more spells or supports than creatures. So having 9 creatures and at the sacrifice of spell and support slots is just no good these days. I feel like that's what they used to do back in the day to balance out planeswalkers that they thought maybe were overpowered. But in this day and age, it just makes for worse deck building, less creative deck building. So 4 spells and 4 supports in the modern day of playing this game is just not acceptable. A Johnny Vengeant. I used to like a Johnny Vengeant for this reason, because you could get a lot of spells and supports in his deck, more so than a lot of planeswalkers at the time. So I would sometimes use him to build the decks I wanted that I wasn't able to in other planeswalkers. And then Kalemne, Disciple of Iroas, really solid. 6 spells, 6 supports is usually plenty for the type of builds they're going to make with her. So that's cool. All right, now let's get into the loyalty abilities, because that's kind of where the bread and butter of planeswalkers come from. You kind of base what you want to do with a planeswalker on them. So it's important that they are good. And as you can see, Nahiri's first ability gets the thumbs down for me. Everybody else is so either simple, elegant, or just does a lot for you. So target creature loses can't attack and gains Berserker. So you can target either your creature or your opponent's creature. So if you target your own creature, it gets first strike and +2 to it. So the idea is that you can use one of your creatures to bash into another one and make it so that it will cause enough damage for it to die, and having first strike means that it will survive. But you can do that same thing to your opponent's creature, like say one that has I don't know, flying or something that's gonna, and you want it to bash into a defender of yours. You could do that, and that creature will get +2, +0, but it'll also gain Berserker, which it won't really need at that point. But anyway, so it's just such a very situational ability. I found that I was using it a decent amount just because I didn't have anything better to do with her loyalty abilities. But it's not a great ability. I mean, everybody else's ability is better, especially Kalemne's, where you create basically a token that gives your first creature haste, and it will buff it up, and it will also fetch a large creature for you. So it's such a good ability, very useful, and it's leagues above Nahiri the Unforgivings. I wish they did more with Nahiri's ability, or just did more with it. If the creature got more of a buff, maybe it would be a little more acceptable to me. But +2/+0 in first strike. What if it got, +2 for every level it goes up? So you got like +8/+0 in double strike until end of turn. That would be amazing. And that would be an ability I would be spamming the hell out of. Even if it costed more. I keep forgetting to add. Okay, I'll add in the cost of these loyalty abilities, because that is one of the things that it's one of the small saving graces of this ability. It's very cheap. We can go back and see how much it was again. Okay, so I went back to look at it, and it costs 6 loyalty to use. And honestly, that might be a little overcosted. Maybe if it costed 3, you could just spam it a lot. But other than that, not a big fan. Loyalty ability 2. Okay, there are a lot of issues with her loyalty ability 2. First of all, it's discard up to 3 cards, but it doesn't tell you that it's discarding from the top of your hand. So it's discarding the first 3 cards in your hand. And God, was it a surprise when I first used this ability, because I had 3 cards full of mana in my hand, expecting it to work on the bottom 3, ended up discarding them. So I ended up with 3 cards I didn't want because I was planning on discarding them, and they had 0 mana on them. So that was a surprise, and it's going to surprise you unless you watch this video. So that is very much a warning there. And then, okay, the last card in your hand gains X mana. X is equal to the number of creature and equipment cards in play in your graveyard. So the creatures, I don't believe they count reinforcements, but I think it's only counting one instance, no matter how many times it's reinforced. So at most, the creatures you can have into play are 3. So, and then equipment cards. I mean, I guess if you put 6 equipments in your deck, then and you happen to have a copy of all of them in your graveyard, that would be, or in play, that would be 9. So the idea is to fill up your graveyard with creature and equipment cards, but that's a little difficult to do in red and white right now. So the idea is just to be able to discard and draw a bunch of new stuff all the time. So you have to build for that, and it's not that big of a payoff for the ability, but it's still probably her most useful ability. If you're using something like, say, Alhammer's Archive, you can refill your entire hand with new cards, and one of them gets mana. I wish this ability gave all your new cards that much mana. I think that would have made her a much better Planeswalker with a much better ability if you were able to do that. Because, putting 4 or whatever cards in your grave and pulling out 3 new cards and having them all get 4 mana, that's nothing that bad, nothing to sneeze at. But as is, it's only the last card you pull that gets that mana, which is just not strong enough of an ability to me. But I don't know. I never liked Nahiri the Harbinger's second ability. I never thought it was very good. Discard a card, draw 2 cards, and destroy 3 white gems. I remember using it mostly as a way to destroy your opponent's Hixis, but that's not something I'm going to really use very often. It's all about her first and third ability. Then a Johnny Vengeance was actually a pretty useful card in its, or useful ability in its day. Deal 6 damage to target creature and gain 6 life. Sometimes it was a way to both destroy a creature and get some badly needed life back. So that's saved me a few times in the day. But I don't know. Again, very outclassed and outdated ability at this point. So just by default, I don't even think this Kalemne ability is close to her best one, but it's still better than everybody else's. The first creature card in your hand with base cost 14 or greater gains double strike, vigilance, and X mana. X is equal to your experience points. So you kind of have to spam her other abilities in order to get a lot of experience points to get a lot of mana for that card. But it's kind of a little bit on the more expensive side, I want to say. But it's still a pretty good ability when you get a big beefy creature with double strike and vigilance on the board for you. So pretty solid ability. Just not my favorite one of hers. And now, Loyalty Ability 3. So this one might be the most controversial of her abilities, but I actually don't think it's the worst one of hers. I know Gauze would disagree, but if you build for it, you can actually win games with it. Although, you better win that game or else you're not coming back. So, let's look at it. Reinforce all creatures you control X times. Those creatures gain haste and outcast. X is the number of creature and equipment cards in your graveyard, including their reinforcements. So, I don't know what that means, including their reinforcements, because cards in your graveyard don't stack. There's just different instances of it, but it's still the same amount of cards. Like a creature that's reinforced 3 times and then gets destroyed, ends up in your graveyard, it's going to be 3 copies of that creature, right? So I don't know why they need to add including the reinforcements, because it's not the only time a card really reinforces is when it's on the battlefield, and it's not counting the creatures that are on the battlefield, right? So that kind of sucks. And then gain 6 loyalty, which is whatever. It is kind of a cheap ability. It only costs 12, but you're costing yourself 12 mana to basically either win or lose. So it basically means you better win this turn, or you're basically putting yourself in a hole that's going to be really hard to get yourself out of. If you don't at least like lose the game the next turn, whatever, you're going to be well on your way if your opponent is situated to make a comeback or like continue doing what they're doing. At least with Dihada's third ability, it wipes your opponent's side of the board too. So why this is such a problem is because your creatures gain haste in Outcast, and Outcast exiles your creatures from the board your next turn. This loyalty ability would have been so much better if they did not get Outcast. Maybe they got like imminent death, or even were destroyed, like that spell back in the day, Amonkhet, that set. But I can't remember what it was called. But it was basically a red spell that gave all your creatures haste, berserker, trample, I think double strike as well. But it also destroyed them. So if it destroyed them instead, they would at least go all into your graveyard. And if by chance you're able to restore your hand, put all your creatures back on the battlefield, and then use this ability, then you can keep stacking the amount of reinforcements you're doing with them. But instead, they get all outcasted. They go to your exile, and they don't help you at all when you're using this ability again. So it's basically a kamikaze ability, and you better hope you win. All right. So with that said, let's move on to the other Planeswalker's abilities. Nahiri the Harbinger has a similar ability, actually. Give a creature you control haste and trample until the end of turn, and that creature is also reinforced 4 times until the end of turn. A much more useful, much more elegant ability. I know you can't just like copy the same ability to another new Planeswalker, or I don't know, I guess you could if technically, but I understand them not really wanting to do that to keep the game a little bit more interesting. But I know it only affects one of your creatures, but at least you don't lose it, like I said. And then a Johnny Vengeant. The only reason I think this is the worst third ability out of all four of these is because you can actually win with Nahiri's third ability, and I'll show you a deck that does it pretty well. But just a Johnny Vengeance, it kind of helps you with certain things, creating gem matches, destroying gems, does a lot of different things for you. But it's very situational as well. You kind of have to build for it in a way that will actually really benefit you. But it's possible. I mean, it's not a bad ability at all. It especially if you're going against a white walker that's playing, suppression bonds and Hixus or any other nasty one shield support. It's good for getting rid of that. But other than that, it just doesn't do as much for you as you think it would. And then Calamnes is the best because it's just an ability that keeps on giving. Create a Greater Giant's Triumph token for shield with a resilient, so it can't be destroyed by normal means. And when a creature you control deals with base cost 14 or greater attacks, it deals damage equal to its power to the opponent's planeswalker and to the first opposing creature. And you gain 10 experience points. So it actually helps you with your other abilities by doing this. So this is one of the reasons people love using Calamne, in that she is considered either a high A tier or an S tier walker with most people. Some people might even put her up in the S plus tier, but she's such a good walker. And if anything, if you don't already have Calamity, you should get her before spending $30 on Nahiri the Unforgiving, because she is so much better. And all the decks I'm about to spotlight, she will probably run better than Nahiri the Unforgiving. All right, so with all that said, let's get into the decks that I created for Nahiri. All right, so the first battle I'm going to... All right, so the first deck I'm going to show you is actually a Peasant deck that my coalition mate Gulthoran actually put together for me. He doesn't actually own Nahiri, so he wanted me to try this out for him, and it's actually pretty good. It's all based around mostly equipment and just buffing up your creatures. And this Kemba is actually a card that comes with Nahiri when you buy her. So when a cat creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may have a gain bravery. Otherwise, first fetch the first equipment card from your library. At the beginning of your turn, your creatures gain +X until the beginning of your next turn. X is the number of equipment cards you control, including their reinforcements. So that's cool. Activate 2 white, create a cat token, its power and toughness become 2/2. So I mostly end up using it for that +X. And then Guardian of New Benalia is a good way to get some extra cards in your hand that you might be throwing away by using her second ability. So there's a lot of unexpected synergy in here. I think it's just due to all the equipment buffing up your creatures. And then Danitha is just a really solid creature overall. And so, yeah, there's not much more to say about it. I'll just get right into the battle. Okay, so first thing I want to do is get Danitha out on the board. She's a really good wall. It's hard for a lot of creatures to get through to damaging me when she's out there. So, do that first. So, I'm going to go ahead and use her first ability to get rid of Mr. Orfeo there. I have enough mana on this yellow swap to get the hero's emblem out. Oh yeah, and I nicely went into getting Sigarda's imprisonment also, but let's see what happens here. Can use her ability to put my to put a first strike on an angel and wipe out the Soul of Emancipation. So her first ability is pretty situational, but does come in handy sometimes. Oh, I didn't realize that. Cigar's imprisonment. That would happen. Oh well, let's see how far I can go. So now at least he can't attack. He won't be able to transform. And I'll show you how her second ability works. See, it destroys the top 3 cards in your hand. And I have a decent amount of creatures and equipment in my graveyard due to the fact that Soul of Emancipation has just been wiping them off the board, but at least we get to use that to our advantage. Okay, so we did cruise to the win there. This deck is a little slow because none of our creatures have that much power on them, but it's fairly resilient. As long as they're not playing tons of creature removal, that deck will serve you well. So, yeah, if you have a lot of these cards, which you might, if you're a bit of a newer player, you can totally build that deck and you might get some good use out of it, but you're probably building most of it with just yeah, I think a Johnny. You're probably just better off using a Johnny Invigorate Leadership, who's a much better planeswalker for that deck, and it will work probably much better for you. So there is that battle. All right, so this next battle, this deck was mostly put together by Killroy, who, if you are on Discord, you probably have seen the name. He's a very active member of the community, and him and I really like to theory craft and put together decks and test them and share our findings on the Discord. So I really like his contributions, and this is one of them. So kind of the same deal, just a little bit stronger creatures in here. Savior of Volenbach is there also to take advantage of things that get exiled, like her third ability, but this is mostly going on her second ability, trying to build that up, using Ren and 6 as a way to take advantage of the cards in our graveyard. And the Sword of Forge and Frontier is really good, especially to grab lands, but it's also nice, to buff up our creatures and giving our cards some extra mana that we fetch. So it's going to be a similar battle, but just hopefully a little bit stronger. All right, so what do we got here? We got Savior and Sword of Forge and Frontier. We'll get Savior on the board and start putting everything into our exile and see if Savior gets destroyed or exiled here. Yep. So we'll put all these things back on the board for us. They must have, yeah, Kami War. All right. So if Kami War is on the board, hold off on casting things until it's not there anymore. Or at least until you've read a few chapters of it. The Sword of Forge and Frontier is a little weak. It only has 2 shields, which I don't love, but it's still a good card when it stays on the board. Let's see. what we get. Not a lot of mana, but we'll see. Get another sword on the board. That'll be nice. Cool. I don't know why he doesn't just use his first ability on my judge, but maybe he just doesn't want me to get a Sinner's Judgment token down. But whatever. So Jaxus is cool because not only do you give your creature haste and reinforce it, but you put more things in the graveyard, which is always nice. For her, at least. Okay, so I believe we can shoot to kill here. Let's go ahead and use our third ability. Yeah, that works for me. Thing about it is if you have a lot of weenie creatures, that ability is not going to do a whole lot for you. So in the next battle, I will show you a deck that takes advantage of her third ability a lot better. But yeah, that one was cool. It won pretty easily, and it took advantage of her abilities a little more. But let's get into my favorite deck I've built for her. Okay, so here is my Raffine deck. And so Raffine is going to put tons of things into our graveyard. Avaricious Dragon is going to be breaking gems as you connive. And Churning Reservoir is actually a pretty nice little token builder. At the beginning of your turn, you may have target creature you control gain oil counter 1. If you don't, another artifact support you control at random gains oil counter 1. When a card you control gains oil counter, create a goblin token. It gains the Phyrexian subtype. When a card you control with oil counter is destroyed or loses a reinforcement, create a goblin token. It gains the Phyrexian subtype. So pretty much at the beginning of your turn, you'll be creating a couple of goblins, which with Raffine, the more goblins you have, the more you're going to be able to connive. So you're going to be putting a ton of things into your graveyard. We'll be able to pull them out with Invoke Justice, and Renin 6 is going to give us loyalty with the gems it converts, along with Avaricious Dragon, destroying gems and creating cascades. And so we'll be putting a ton of things into our graveyard and swinging for the kill with that dragon. So let's see how it works. Okay, go for that meeting of the 5 first. I want to keep that Void Rend, so I won't connive yet. I'll put something in my hand that I want to put into the graveyard first. So I should say one cool thing about her second ability is if you only have one card in your hand, you could still use her first or second ability. You do have to have at least one card in your hand though. But it's cool with all these cascades you can make with her, with the dragon. Alright, well, we're going to win it anyway, but we have enough loyalty to use her third ability now. And now since I put so much things in the graveyard with Raffine, let's see what we end up with here. Not bad. Pretty good. So that's what I'm saying. If you don't win on this turn, you're probably going to be set back pretty far. I mean, right now, I kept it pretty safe, and didn't leave a lot on the board for them to hit me back with. But if you're in a long, hard battle, yeah, you could end up really screwed there if you miscalculated and don't reinforce your creatures enough for the kill there. If you want to try and fit Alchemist Gambit in there, so you double strike everybody with your third ability there, then that's also an option there if you want to try and figure out where to put that in there. But yeah, so there you go. That's the best I can do with her third ability there. If you really want to build for it, it can be a pretty effective ability, but you really got to be careful. So, my final thoughts on Nahiri the Unforgiving. Is she a good walker? Is she worth really investing a lot of money or even crystals into her? Personally, I think no. And here's why. I feel like for a planeswalker to really be worth using, they really have to be in service of the cards you have and not the other way around. Meaning, you shouldn't need to have a certain card or type of cards that you own in order for a planeswalker to work well. And Nahiri is so dependent on the type of cards you put into her deck to make her abilities usable. And I don't think that the payoff for using those cards is enough to justify using her over any other red-white planeswalker that I have, especially Kalemne. I guarantee you that if I use Kalemne in any of my decks that I just showcased, that she would run them better than Nahiri the Unforgiving would. With maybe the exception of the Raffine deck, because that one's really building for her third ability. But I think it would probably be more consistent overall to use that deck with Kalemne. So I just think that Oktagon, moving forward, they should take that principle into consideration of building out planeswalker abilities that help cards really be enhanced. Like take Kasmina, for example. All three of her abilities either help you get the cards you need or enhance the cards you already have. Her first ability helps you fetch cards and it buffs your first creature. Her second ability helps you cast spells, lets you reuse your vanguards in the same turn. And her third ability draws you cards and buffs your creatures and levels up any cards that have the leveling ability. So all three of those abilities are fantastic. Not to mention her mana gains are great too. So I know that not every planeswalker is going to come with the same amount of equal power in abilities, but at least swing for the fences every time. Don't make planeswalkers so dependent on certain deck types. It just makes them really niche and just hard to justify using over other planeswalkers. I think it's just a waste of time and resources for Oktagon to create planeswalkers whose abilities are so niche they're just going to be panned by the community in general. And if you work on planeswalkers that are actually good or actually will be good, using that very simple principle of making your planeswalker work for your cards rather than the other way around. So that's my thought on Nahiri the Unforgiving. I really look forward to showcasing Kaito for you because even though he isn't quite top tier, I think that he's really fun and a lot more playable than Nahiri the Unforgiving. So look forward to that one coming soon. All right, till next time.